Now, it's very common for people who are against the Imperium to say that only humanity is feeding chaos and can fall to chaos. To that I say, nuh-uh.
As he described the grisly details of the tortures and the murders appearing to the detectives, and one of the detectives said he appeared as the devil himself. I mean, this guy was a real jerk.
In all seriousness, when I caught wind of this whole thing, I knew I immediately had to make a video about it, because the idea of Chaos Eldar is so weird and seen as so non-canon, and yet it absolutely is. Now, before anything, I want to state that this isn't some major, huge plot development or anything, or something that's going to completely shake the setting. It's more background information that I think is just really cool to know and fun to speculate on. As such, don't expect this video to be, or take it as serious as a heart attack. This one's mostly just for fun. And if you enjoy this video as much as I enjoyed making it, please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not already done so. And with that being said, let's dive right into Chaos Eldar. Now, it shouldn't surprise you when I say that talking about Chaos Eldar is markedly different than something like Chaos Cultists or Chaos Space Marines. Generally speaking, Chaos Eldar can be divided into two groups. The first being Degenerates, and the next being True Eldar. Now, when I say Degenerates, it's not, degenerates like you belong on a cross or anything like that. We have a very certain connotation when it comes to the word degenerate. But in this context, it literally means just that. Degenerated from what an Eldar would be. Sort of devolved, basically. And that is what they're called in the book. The first example, and the one that most people will probably know about, are something called Shriekers, and these guys show up in the very first Fabius Bile book. Now, I'll start off by saying this one's kind of cheating. There are more interesting ones later on down the line, so stay tuned. They're effectively a cross between Old Eldari and Terran bats, as described in the book. And they get their name Shrieker from the fact that they shriek and wail in anguish and agony as they go about their lives, sort of wobbling around on the ground on all fours like a bat would, or flapping through the air. So you might ask, why have we never seen these in canon? Well, the reason is because they only really exist in the Eye of Terror, back where the old Eldari Empire used to be located before the birth of Slaanesh. These were those ones who survived the fall, but would carry on heavily mutated, slowly drifting further and further away from the original Eldari template of their genetics. They're actually referred to as Ab-Eldari, kind of like ab-humans, like Ogrins, or Phalanids, or those sort of things. Yes, they're technically part of the species, but genetically and structurally different enough to warrant that prefix of Ab. And I think this is the only time we really ever see the word Ab-Eldari thrown around, but I just find it really interesting. And they're basically unacknowledged by other Eldar entirely. Now, why do I call these guys cheating? Well, the reason is, they're really not Eldar anymore. That Ab is honestly just a courtesy. They're more or less animals at this point. Ogrins are still humans, you can see it, and so are the other ones like Beastmen. That core humanity is there, but these guys are just wailing, shrieking animals. However, Fabius Bile himself does remark that he wants to study them because they are the most stable of the Ab-Eldari lines. Stable in this context to me probably means that these guys have a consistent sort of form, pattern of behavior, steady reproduction cycle, and things like that, as opposed to other ones which are probably more or less just a crapshoot. And yeah, that would generally make sense, because this isn't natural evolutionary mutation. They didn't evolve to survive better in the Eye of Terror, they more or less just got lucky. Well, lucky is in hard air quotes here, because, come on. It's basically just chaos mutation. And one thing I've actually always thought of chaos mutations as is kind of like magic radiation. It can either be gifts from the chaos gods, which could be more deliberate and are usually a reward for something or a punishment, or it can be more random mutations that occur just from being around the energy of the warp. Again, kind of what you will see in people who have been exposed to radiation or chemical agents that have altered their genetic structure in some way, kind of like Agent Orange in Vietnam or Cambodia. And why am I going on this tangent? Well, bear with me, because it will come up again later. Now, moving forward with that sort of degenerated Eldar theme, there is another example, and it's even better than Shriekers in my opinion, because Shriekers are more or less animals, but these next ones are not. They're called Eldar monstrosities, quote-unquote, and they come from the book Atlas Inferno by Rob Sanders, a book that I find incredibly interesting and would highly recommend. You see, in the book, the Inquisitor Bronislaw Savak visits an Eldar crone world in the Eye of Terror called Arak Sign, and what he finds there is incredibly interesting. because there is a small community of Eldar monstrosities. And when I say community, I don't mean an animalistic colony like the Shriekers, it is a genuine community. And we actually have art of these guys on the cover of the book Atlas Infernal despite the small role they play, and they do genuinely look like Eldar. Granted, really messed up, but still, you can tell this was an Eldar. What they have is their own archaeo market. What this archaeo market is a place where old goods are sold and bartered by the people who live on this crone world, the Eldar Degenerates, and visitors who come from outside. Some people being Fra'al pirates, chaos cultists, there's someone who's implied to be a Drukhari, and most importantly, Eldari rangers. Because this is where an Eldari ranger named Unabel Phoebe, who's a very interesting character, gets the spirit stones that are so vital for the survival of the Eldari craft worlds. In the book, it states, and I quote, "The vendors, like the pickets and minders that hung off the stalls, were all gibbering, misshapen savages. A community of Eldar monstrosities warped by the planet's malign influence. The fat, antique weaponry pieces, clutched by the denizens, were largely reclaimed shuriken casters, single-shot accelerators plied with grape storms of monomolecular frag. Slipping through the wretches and stalls were other visitors to the archaeo market. Clute could see groups of all but naked Eldar, jangling with blades and decorated in revealing scraps of spiked chitinous armor. Off-world mutants, twisted mercenaries, and warped-blessed cultists were about their business, bawling and bartering with the vendors. Savak almost walked into a posse of Fra'al pirates, who seemed hungry for confrontation, until Torquil's hulking form hove into view in his power armor and servo harness. The only true currency in the Eye was power, and it was that drew a myriad of denizens down to the Crone world's surface. In the supernatural arms race that perpetually existed in Dread Space, advantage was everything. Cursed artifacts and warp technology of ancient and often alien design were routinely unearthed and sold on the bustling archaeo market to bidders of dark purpose. Demon worlds were as different as they were damned. Araxine was no Iblisif, but it still harbored dangers of a more subtle kind. The corruptive powers of the warp flowed freely through Epiphany and Hessian, but between the Atlas Infernal's pariah pages, Torquil's purity seals, and Clute's baptismal baths, the group experienced some protection from the constancy of the planet's malign influence. Savak took in the scene, clearly looking for something. Clute and his team waited by a flaming metal barrel which was warming a bundle of Eldar aberrations. The creatures slunk off into the market throng, leaving Torquil to admire the vendibles on a nearby stall, and Epiphany to pluck her hands from her gloves and warm them by the fire. That is so interesting to me, because when you think Eldar touched by the warp or stuck in the Eye of Terror, you would think, again, some horrible suffering thing, but no, they're just chilling. Like, they literally are there with their own markets and society doing more or less fine. Like, I can't imagine these guys' lives are worse than any lower hiver on any Imperial planet, more or less. What they do is wait by the sea for Eldari artifacts to wash on shore or to dig them up from the ground and then just put them up for sale to anyone who's going to come buy them. Because people are looking for power in the Eye of Terror, and ancient Eldari artifacts usually are pretty good for that sort of thing, especially if they've been corrupted or touched by the warp. And what's really interesting is the fact that other Eldar are willing to treat with them. Again, we hear talk of Drukhari on this planet in the market. And furthermore, the fact that they're willing to treat with other Eldar perfectly fine is even more interesting to me. It's almost like they're a somewhat accepted, if not ignored, part of the Eldari culture or society. Well, I shouldn't say culture or society, I mean the wider tree of Eldari factions. Because we do hear talk of what are described to be effectively Drukhari, and previously mentioned Unabel Phoebe, the Ranger. Here's the passage where we see her actually doing business with one of these guys. At a stall loaded with relics and artifacts, and swamped by gabbling degenerates, Clute saw a striking figure, tall and commanding, even in the depths of a hood and the camouflaged swaths of an Eldar cloak coat. She put up 3 fingers to the mutant vendor, attempting to make herself understood. An exchange was made in which the degenerate handed her 3 brightly colored spirit stones that the figure deposited into a soft belt bag. "Belphoebe!" Savak called out, but couldn't make himself heard over the din of the archaeo market. She made off into a nest of tents and stalls as Savak had to dodge between misshapen Araxanites and the spoiling Thrall pirates to catch up. Now see, you would think that other Eldar would be horrified by these creatures and would not have the stomach to even look at them for what they represent and just knowing what happened, but here she is literally just buying spirit stones with a side of fries from them. And she has not alone either. She has a bunch of compatriots with her in their own little stall that they're using as a base to buy more spirit stones and whatever gear they need. Now, moving on to proper Eldar. But first, I did kind of lie, because when I say proper Eldar, that is in air quotes. Because the first one I'm going to talk about is Mandrakes. Now, Drukhari Mandrakes are these shadowy, oily creatures that glow with green light, and we're not exactly sure if they're entirely Eldar. Some people believe that they're descended from the original inhabitants of the Webway. Now, when I say original inhabitants, I mean the original creatures to evolve and inhabit the Webway as, like, vermin, or the ones that were just there, not the old ones who made it. That's an important distinction. But others believe that they might be Eldar who descend from those ancient pleasure cults and as such are so corrupted and touched by the warp and just changed by their evil that they have become these shadowy monsters. Or furthermore, some people believe that they're basically possessed Eldar, that it's a union of Eldari flesh and demonic spirit. Again, we don't know, but I think it's pretty safe to say that these guys are Eldari in some way, and honestly I greatly prefer that. I like the idea that they're these old Eldari who have been corrupted and warped over time. And yeah, in the Path of the Dark Eldar series, we see these guys corrupted by chaos. Specifically, there are two brother rulers of the Mandrakes who are corrupted, and they seem to have willingly given themselves over. One of them has given himself to Nurgle. He has a giant rusted scythe that is, quote, crudely constructed and way too big for him. A Man Reaper, basically. The dude literally has a Nurgle Man Reaper. And furthermore, he is literally seen to get more bloated and just bigger in a more putrid sense over time over the course of the book, Path of the Archon, until he's ultimately killed. And he's not the only one, because his brother and main rival is given over to the, quote, Architect of Fate, aka Tzeentch, and he mutates a bird-like talon claw foot thing. Furthermore, a Harlequin solitaire named Motley can literally sense the touch of Nurgle on Mandrake underlings that he has to fight through. They are literally blessed by Nurgle, and they have the runes of chaos about them, on them, and in their layers. Like, this is straight up giving yourself to Nurgle Death Guard style. And this isn't limited actually to just Mandrakes. Proper Drukhari are seen puppeteered and manipulated by the Chaos Gods, and inadvertently have their souls claimed. With humans, I think you need to more explicitly give yourself over, but with an Eldar, it seems like you can just be snatched up and claimed without you even knowing it. One of them, an Archon plotting against Asdrubal Vecht, is revealed to have his soul claimed by Tzeentch, something that is a shock to him, because it turns out his ambition was so great that it attracted the Fate Weaver's attention. And he isn't the only one. Another Archon who is also plotting against Vecht is revealed to be claimed by Khorne. She has a bloodlust and a love of battle to her, but she is then suddenly killed when she tries to surrender to Vecht by that Harlequin Motley, the Solitaire, and her soul stone starts glowing red after it claims her, indicating, according to him, that yes, the Blood God has claimed her. Granted, she wasn't mutating or anything like that, and her soul wasn't sucked into Khorne's realm. It's just that he had a hold on her and was controlling her and influencing her. It's why she was so bloodthirsty, and why she was able to hold a candle to Vecht in the first place, because she was being powered by Khorne, even if she didn't know it. Similar with the guy who was powered by Tzeentch. Asdrubal Vecht actually taunts him, saying, "You only got as far as you did because your scheming and plotting caught the attention of Tzeentch, and he started granting you powers and abilities. Those were not your own abilities, now you're screwed because your benefactor has grown bored of you." Now, you might be wondering, why doesn't this happen more? Drukhari love combat, and they love to scheme and plot against each other, and they love pain and all these things. Well, the reason is because Khorne is generally speaking bubble-wrapped with runes and sigils and wards and everything they can think of to keep out the influence of chaos so they can function as they see fit without risking corruption. But during events like disjunctions, when things get disturbed, you know, like with the opening of the Great Rift, these wards are knocked out of place and lose their effectiveness, so the chaos powers can slip in. It's how those Mandrakes were able to give themselves willingly to Nurgle and Tzeentch, and how Tzeentch and Khorne were able to influence these Archons without their knowledge. This is exactly what the path system on the Craftworlds is meant to combat against, teaching rigorous discipline so that you don't get subtly influenced without your knowledge. People think, oh, if you don't give yourself to the warp, then the warp can't take you. Maybe that's true for most humans, but with Eldar, it simply isn't. They can slide in subtly if you're not paying attention or if you get carried away. So Craftworlds are capable of this. And that is the big danger of paths such as the path of the Outcast or Ranger or becoming an Eldari Corsair. You lose that stringent level of discipline and will eventually be taken by madness. That is something that is stated but never touched on, and this is what that is. It's why a lot of Corsairs and Rangers still maintain very close ties to their craft worlds and regularly try to visit home or stay in touch. Because if you keep going further and further afield and don't ever come back, well, eventually, Chaos has a good chance of sinking its talons in you, and will never let go. And now some of you might be wondering, what happens if a god other than Slaanesh tries to claim an Eldari soul? Well, odds are the soul will probably be torn apart, because that's actually almost what happened to Horus Lupercal when he continued to deny the Chaos gods, despite all of them wanting a piece of him. His soul was nearly ripped apart, and Malachurst had to really work to get him to give himself to Chaos in order to avoid being torn asunder by the competing powers. That's what I would imagine to an Eldari when they die and are claimed by more than one god. And one more thing before I cap this off with something really interesting is the existence of Cackling Abominations, which are effectively demon hosts but with Eldari bodies. When you bind a demonette into Eldari flesh, they get this horrible rictus jester grin and emit an aura of madness and insanity that affects those around them and have these clawed talons. They're literally just demon hosts but with Eldar bodies, and as such I don't really consider them all that interesting, but sometimes homunculuses do make them, or homunculi I should say, so that they can better study demonettes. Now the last thing I want to talk about here is interesting because it's not from a book, it's actually from an interview between Craftworld Eldar, the YouTube channel which I will absolutely be linking, and Gav Thorpe himself, the writer for Black Library who writes most of the Eldar books. In this interview, he mentions that there are in fact Chaos Eldar. Now granted, this is basically an off-tangent, but he does say that yes, they give themselves over to Chaos. Not part of Craftworlds, not part of anything else, just fully Chaos. And the thing is, we don't see them because the way Games Workshop orients things is large factions, monolithic factions he says, that can constitute the creation of large marketable armies. And Chaos Eldar are not that. They never could be that. However, he says he would love to see it explored in the future in some of the settings like Kill Team or Blackstone. Yeah, a Kill Team of Chaos Eldar would be incredibly interesting in my opinion. And Blackstone Fortress has singular individual characters, some of whom are from backgrounds that would never be explored otherwise, such as that one Man of Iron character that everybody loves to talk about. He's part of the Blackstone Fortress games and in the books, and he's just really cool to think about. He wouldn't exist in any other game. You're not going to have a Man of Iron kill team or an army, but you can have him as a singular character in the small Blackstone Fortress board game. So seeing a Chaos Eldar there would again be really cool. And this one also has precedent because Chaos Eldar, much like this, were canon all the way back in the earliest days of 40k. I'm talking like 2nd edition. Many of you may already know this though from my video, 1st edition lore was bonkers, where I covered just how odd the lore of Rogue Trader and 2nd edition really was compared to what we have now. And funnily enough, that is actually my single most viewed video of all time on this channel. Thank you guys so much for the support on that one, it was insane. And yeah, that's basically the size of it. Eldar can be corrupted by chaos, and Chaos Eldar are a thing. Be they mutants like the Shriekers or Aberrations that we see in the Eye of Terror, or Drukhari Mandrakes that have given themselves over, or Drukhari that have subtly become corrupted through no fault of, well, it is fault of their own, but through no willingness of their own, or the Eldari Rangers who have fallen victim to the insanity of the world, or, as Gav Thorpe says, small, effectively kill teams or solitary figures who are regular Eldar who did give themselves over. In my mind, that is so cool. I really think introducing that in a larger capacity would be really good for the Eldar in general. It would open up more story possibilities, could see them show up in other places, bring them into the wider plot, maybe take away a bit of that smug edge that they have that a lot of people tend to find off-puttingly distasteful. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think Chaos Eldar is an interesting plot point? how do you feel is the best version of them? Either the mutant ones, those Mandrakes, the Drukhari, or these ones Gav Thorpe has mentioned, more akin to the 1st and 2nd edition Chaos Eldar? Do you think it should be a thing at all, or would you prefer not at all, because Eldar should be different and not affected by that sort of thing? In my opinion, my favorite ones are the Eldar Aberrations from Atlas Infernal, and these ones that Gav Thorpe has mentioned, because with Drukhari, that just feels a little bit cheap, I guess. As always, I would love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and until then, I will see you in the next video.